Afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending on where you're joining from today. Thanks for being part of our weekly live stream. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And today's topic in today's live stream is career advice for business and technology consultants. So we are really going to hone in and dive into just what it takes to succeed in the world of consulting. And joining me is a guest that I'll introduce in just a moment, a veteran in the business and technology consulting space. So I'm very excited to have him here today, and I'll introduce him here in just a moment. But before I introduce our guest, a couple logistical things. First of all, this live discussion, this live podcast interview that you're all a part of by being here today is going to be part of our weekly podcast called Transformation Ground Control. And that's a weekly podcast we publish each week that has to do with digital transformation, all things related to digital transformation. And you can find new episodes of that show every week by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. And there's new episodes that come out every Wednesday. So thanks for being part of the live production of this podcast. And this interview will become sort of the center stone of an upcoming episode that'll come out here in a few weeks. Secondly, we'd love to get audience questions. I know career advice related topics are especially interesting to people that attend live streams like these. So love to hear any questions you have as it relates to careers in the business and technology consulting space. You can ask those questions by dropping those in the chat on whatever platform you're watching here today, whether it's YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter or X. Please feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We'll keep an eye on the chat here, and we'll get to those questions as we go here today. And then lastly, before we get started, before I introduce our guest, if you don't mind, just drop in the chat what city and country you're joining from today. I'd love to hear where the global audience is joining. We tend to draw people from all over the world in these live discussions, so I'd love to hear where you're joining from. So just drop in the chat if you don't mind. What city and country are you in? Myself and my guest are both in Denver, Colorado, here in the United States, but love to hear where you're joining from here today. So all that being said, today's topic again is career advice for business and technology consultants. And joining me is Rob Novick, who is the CEO of a company called Pasture Advisors. Rob, thanks for being here today.
My pleasure, Eric. Nice to see you.
Good to see you too. And before I ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself, just a sort of a disclaimer. I don't know if it's really a disclaimer, but just to share with the audience, I suppose is a better way to say it. You and I go way back. I used to work for you 25 years ago. I worked for you, or 20. I guess it was more like 20 years ago. I'm not that old, but 20 years ago, you and I first started working together. You're an advisor to Third Stage Consulting now, but I learned a lot about consulting through you. And not to put you on the spot or put too much pressure on you, but the reason I wanted to have you on this podcast is because I learned so much about what I think it takes to be a good consultant. I learned through you. So I'm really excited to have you on the show here today. But before we sort of dive into some of these questions around consulting advice and that sort of thing, tell us a little bit about your extensive background in the consulting space and also what you're up to here nowadays with Pasture Advisors.
Sure. I guess it's really kind of three parts, and I'll try not to make this too long. I actually started my career at Bell Labs, and my area of expertise at the time was machine learning. And I read once in a newspaper at Bell Labs about a company called McKinsey, and it got me very interested in consulting. So this is in the mid 80s. I wound up going back to business school, took a job in Europe with a consultancy that did work as the telecom industry deregulated across Europe. And we spent about 2 years there. And when I came back to the United States, I joined a company called North Highland. Eric, you remember North Highland? I know that.
I do.
Business consulting, management consulting, really an awesome organization. I couldn't say enough great things about my time at North Highland. But you could count the number of employees on two hands when I started. And when we reached about 700, things were different. The culture was different. The leadership was different. And so I started my own firm. I put a half a bottle of wine into my wife, and out came the name Envision. And that's where the business name came from. And we started. I had a partner, and we wound up being just moderately successful. Ultimately sold to private equity. We merged with another firm. And then sold that to a very large international IT firm, and I kind of retired. Uh, but the thing that got me to Blue Pasture is what I really loved to do, which was um, advising organizations on how to grow. And I was always interested in the transaction part of things. And so that's how we got there. And Blue Pasture has been around now for I'd say about a year and a half. Um, it's been a very enjoyable ride so far.
Yeah, it's sort of an opportunity for you to apply your consulting experience because you sort of are still consulting, but it's in a different context now. How maybe explain the types of clients you work with now, or how you made that transition from traditional consulting into what you're doing now with Blue Pasture.
Yeah, at Envision, we work with really the Fortune 1000. So these are large companies, and anybody who's been in consulting for a while knows that you do a program or you give advice, and it kind of goes into whatever mechanism there is within that organization, and by the time it filters through to some result at the bottom, it could be years if you ever see it at all. Working with smaller organizations now, really in the middle market, we're looking at organizations from maybe 5 to 100 million top line. Those results are uh, right there at the fore, right? You make changes, you get to see those changes. It's kind of like running my own business, where I was able to make a decision and make a change. And now it's really through advising the executive teams. But for me, the tie back to Envision was we created 4 divisions at Envision. There was the Envision Business Consulting, a thing called Envision Capital, which I'll get back to, Envision Talent, where we helped place people at our clients, and then we had the Envision Foundation. We gave 5% of our profits to local not-for-profits trying to do good in the communities where we worked. But Envision Capital, the whole idea was taking some of the proceeds from consulting, investing those in smaller organizations, and trying to build wealth for our employees. It was a great idea. Occasionally we got sidecar funding. Ultimately, though, the problem was that in order to grow consulting, it really sucked all the air out of the room. So there was not a whole lot of money to invest in these other companies, which we then in turn hope to advise. And that looks exactly like Blue Pasture today.
Interesting. So you sort of took that idea and sort of ran with that as a focus area.
Yeah, I pulled the piece that I enjoyed the most out of that and kind of resurrected it, and here we are
Oh,
now.
interesting. So back in the day when you read this article about McKinsey you were talking about, and actually I don't know this part of your background, even though you and I have known each other forever. I didn't know this piece of it, but you read about a company called McKinsey. What was it that triggered or piqued your interest that said, hey, I might want to go back to business school and become a consultant? What drew you to the field?
It was the kind of the projects. I can't remember the exact article, but it was the projects that they were talking about. And McKinsey had this cachet that they were um, all about business, and it was so funny being at AT&T, and the work that we were doing was so focused on one small area. I had no idea that this was going on in the world, that there were actually people who advised businesses. I mean, in a way, it sounds so naive, but that was the truth. It's,
Right.
every once in a while you get exposed to something that you actually didn't know existed. And so I started to do research, and AT&T was actually very supportive of it, and paid for my first year of business school with no strings attached. So my wife and I were actually very happy about that. That was another little box of gold that we wound up
Right.
stumbling across.
Especially at that age, that point in your career when you're starting
Yeah,
getting started out, it's nice to have someone pay for your school there. Um,
absolutely.
and another interesting thing, I don't want to gloss over this detail of your background, but I find this super fascinating. Is your degree was in artificial intelligence, right? You studied artificial intelligence 35 years ago. Is that right?
So, no, my degree was math, um,
Okay.
But the work that we did at the time it wasn't really called artificial intelligence. In the 80s, it was called machine learning, where
Right.
I was. And it was a lot of self-modifying code, that kind of stuff. And it really was fantastic. And, for those people who are familiar with Unix and C, I worked in a building where the people who invented that actually worked. And if you had a question, um, or you could go to somebody and say, this technology that you invented, it doesn't work the way as advertised. I was always wrong, I will tell you that. I would go in and I would say, this doesn't work, and they were like, you're using it wrong, or you're doing it wrong, and they would
Right.
explain it to me, and they were right, and I would go back to work, and I would apply what they told me. But that was one of the greatest parts about being there, was you were just involved with all these just fantastic minds. Um,
Yeah.
Everybody was smarter than me. I don't know how the hell I got in there,
Right.
honestly.
It's a great feeling, though. I mean, well, it's humbling, I suppose, but it's also a great feeling, when because I've had that feeling too, where you're like, wow, I'm around a bunch of really smart people and I feel a little humbled, but I'm going to just take advantage of the opportunity to learn from all these people.
Absolutely. Enjoy the ride. I'll fake it until
Right.
somebody either figures me out or I find success.
Right. Well, I think that's super interesting that you were starting to touch a field that 30, 35 years ago, I didn't even know machine learning had a name back then, to be honest. So it's interesting that you were doing something that's so hot right now and so trendy right now. So I guess that's one way of saying you're 30, 35 years ahead of your time. You're a pioneer in the machine learning slash AI space.
That's really flattering, Eric. Thank you.
Yeah, I know you're too. I like giving you compliments because you're so humble. I know you don't like it. And it makes you mildly uncomfortable. So I'll try to do that a couple more times throughout this interview, just to put you on the spot. But but here's a question actually. Before I sort of dive into some of my questions, I want to turn to the audience real quick. We've got a lot of good responses here to the real simple question: where are you joining from today, and what country are you in? I want to say hello to a few people: Sabir in Lewis Center, U.S., Amy from Houston, Texas. We've got someone from Pune, India, someone from Istanbul, Jazree's from Toronto. We've got others from joining from throughout the U.S. as well. So thank you for being here today. Here's a question from Darian, and this is actually similar to a question I was going to ask you too, Rob, but just to sort of set the context or to get things started here in the conversation, what are some of the things, the number one things that a newer consultant should focus on? I want to start with people that are maybe just earlier in their careers or they're thinking about getting into consulting. There's so much to think about as a consultant. There's so much you feel like you need to learn from a
Yeah.
technical hard skill set to some of the intangibles. What if you had to pick one thing, if I'm a new consultant, what's that one piece of advice or that one skill set that you think is important?
Well, and not to expand the question, but you have to kind of split it into two parts, I think. There are those who are looking to join a consultancy and kind of what is that number one thing? And then there's, once you're there and you started, what's the one thing? I think going into an organization, um, organizations, I believe, look either primarily at skill set and skill set fit, or culture and cultural fit, because they say, if we have a good cultural fit, I can teach this person the things that we do and the way that we do it, right? Our methodologies, et cetera. Others say, I have certain skills that I'm looking for, whether they're technology assets or whatever, and it has to fit that way. So I would say, which one are you going to rely on? And you can narrow down what organizations are going to feel the best to you when you go in. And then I think once you're in, what makes you successful, at least in the beginning, there are things that make you successful later, is listen. Do a lot of listening. Listen to clients, listen to people who have been there for a while. Share your opinions, but listen. There's a lot to learn. Consulting, I believe, is very nuanced. And one of the things that always got me when I was, I guess, a younger consultant was we would see new people who were coming in and we would talk to them about consulting, and they would say, I've worked with a million consultants, I know consulting. That is not true. I religiously go to the dentist every 6 months. I know exactly what every one of those tools on that tray does. You do not want me working on your teeth.
Yes,
That's
please
all
don't.
there, right? So
Right.
consulting is really an industry unto itself. We come in contact with a lot of consultants in business, but that doesn't necessarily mean it makes you a good consultant.
Right. Yeah, that's well said. And the other thing I'd add to that is I think, when you're starting off as a consultant, there's the tendency to want to prove, like you were saying, prove that you belong, like prove that I'm smart enough to and I belong in this consulting industry. So I need to demonstrate to you, the client or my peers or whatever. I need to demonstrate all the things I know. And I think, it's hard for a lot of new consultants, especially, to say it's okay if you don't know everything. You can't know everything, no matter how long you've been doing it. So asking questions, listening, and understanding what the client's needs are, what their challenges are, what problem that's unique to them they're facing. I think that's a nuance that a lot of consultants just sort of gloss over and say, I've got the answers. I've done this before. I've seen the situation before. I know what this client needs," rather than taking the time to listen and understand. And I think that's one of the nuances that I've learned from you is you've got to ask really good questions and really understand before you start prescribing and, doing your traditional consulting stuff.
Yeah, I think after you do it long enough, you realize that while every problem is unique, all of the business problems probably fall into somewhere between 8 and 12 buckets, right? And you know it. I've heard this before. I have a pretty good idea of what this is. I may need 6 weeks to figure out that I'm right about
Right.
it, that the problem that I think it is really is this. But you get good at recognizing them, and then whatever solution you come up with really has to be tailored to the organization, because their culture is going to be different, their processes are going to be different, their people are going to be different, leadership is going to be different, right? Nothing, you can't take the solution from here, lift it and put it there, and then it just doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. And even if you know what the 8 to 12 buckets are and you've seen those 8 to 12 buckets before, the combination of issues and the way it all comes together in a potential solution is usually different. I mean, it's going to have pieces
Yeah.
that you recognize from before that you've used before, but it's like your toolbox. You've got this huge toolbox. You've used the tools before over time as you get more established in your career. But even as long as you and I have been doing this, you rarely see a situation where, like, I've seen this exact same situation before. I know it looks exactly like this other client I worked with before. I mean, I can't remember the last time I thought that. I don't even know if I've ever thought that, to be honest.
Yeah.
So really interesting. So just in general, then, so listening. You talk about listening and understanding. What do you think some of the other keys are? And you talk about culture, of course. That's very important. I want to come back to that cultural thing, which is a really important one. I'm going to come back to that in a second. But what are some of the other hard and soft skills that you think are important for consultants, whether they're new consultants or established consultants?
Yeah. Well, I think you answered one of them already, which is ask questions. Ask lots of questions. There seems to be this fear, usually for younger consultants, newer consultants, to ask questions, sometimes that they think, they should know the answer to, right? We've already kind of covered that too. I think the truth is it's always great to hear it from the client's perspective of, how do you see this? What do you think is the answer? And another one, especially as you become more mature, is knowing the right time to ask for the business, which is
Mm,
another thing. Business development, um, you know, I may upset some people by saying this, but I can always find somebody to deliver the work. Always. All right. And too often there's this hubris with delivery consultants that they're the most important. You are important. You're important to the client, you're important to the organization, but some pigs are more equal than others, if you remember Animal
Animal
Farm.
Farm,
And,
right?
and, and that is the consultant who can deliver craft solutions and close a deal is way more valuable to the organization because they are a lot harder to find. Um, and you have to begin to develop those skills. You have to, and it's a lot of it is timing, it's nuance, and you got to understand when the right time is and how to get the client away from whatever it is that they're thinking about to focus on the problem. Sometimes, right, it's dinner, it's a dark restaurant where you have a little bit of time and you can finally ask the question of the client, are you ready to do this now? And this is how much I think it's going to cost. And to be able to kind of craft the solution right there. I used to love that. When I was a kid, we would go to this restaurant called a Ground Round, which some people probably remember. They had peanuts on the floor and popcorn and stuff. But they had this magician, and he would come to the table and he would do stuff right there. He'd roll up his sleeves, and he'd make an egg appear out of like thin air and then make it disappear. And I always thought about that as kind of business development is actually you're at the table there with, right, the client, and you're crafting that solution right there. And you don't have all the answers, but you have enough of the pieces that you pique their interest and they say, yeah, this really makes sense. Well, great. Let me go back. Let me talk to my team. We're going to put this together. We're going to put a letter together. We're going to put it in front of you and we're going to move forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great analogy or metaphor with the magician. But I think going back to a word that you use, I think is critical to maybe unpack a little bit. And that word is hubris. And I think just to build on that, I mean, I take it one step further and say I think one of the most damaging or the most ineffective and undermining traits that a consultant can have is that hubris. That, in other words, that thought that I have the answers. I know everything I need to know. And I think, you see this usually people that are more mid to late career consultants they've been doing it for 20, 30 years or however long. They've been working with the same technology or the same type of business consulting. And they start to get this mentality of, yeah, I've seen this before. I know the answer. I don't need to take the time to understand you, Mr. or Mrs. Client, because I've done this a million times. The minute you do that, I think, you become a lot less effective because the client starts to feel like, hey, you're not listening, you're not understanding. Even if you do understand the perceptions, you're not, because you're not taking the time to understand. And then second, it tells me that you're not continuously sharpening your axe, you're sharpening your saw and continuing to learn and understand. And the minute you stop learning and understanding, I think you stop being a good consultant. And the minute you start thinking you have all the answers, I think you stop being a good consultant. But I'm curious here. I know that's a strong statement, but want to hear what your thoughts are if you had anything to add.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback on that, Eric, because one of the mistakes that I've made, and I've seen others make enough times to know that it happens, and it happens like all the time. That's an exaggeration. I don't mean all the time, but what I mean is we can't seem to learn it as an industry. Okay, so here's the situation. You're in a room, maybe it's two consultants, and you're talking with the client, and let's just say there's 3 of them there. And this is your third conversation that you're having about this problem and the solution. And during that meeting, a 4th person from the client walks in, and you miss the opportunity to A, find out who that person is, and B, catch them up on where you are. You don't bring them up to speed and you wind up excluding them from the conversation, and you're never invited back because the person who entered was actually, let's just say, the gal with the checkbook or somebody important.
CEO or something.
Yep, that you didn't bother to figure out who they were, and you were moving ahead with a solution, and they had a different idea of what that solution was, but you in your mind already thought this was sold and it was done, and you're go and forget, I don't mean sold like dollars sold, but rather that the idea was accepted by the client, and you didn't bother to bring this person up to speed, and the thing falls apart.
And the thing is, it doesn't matter how brilliant that solution was. It could have been the most brilliant, most spot on solution that you're recommending, but it doesn't matter because you didn't sell it. You didn't convince the right decision makers or the right influencers in the company.
That's right. And in a mid-sized consultancy, you really want the client to think in a lot of ways that either it was their idea or that certainly they were part of the solution. I think with some of the really large organizations, if you're going to do, let's say, a large SAP implementation, there's a lot of organizations, right? They've never gone through it. And so they are just relying on you for all your knowledge and all your advice. They have no idea of
Right.
what this is going to look like. And so, not to say that it's easier, but the path has been walked many times to say, look, these are the things that make this a success, and these are the things that make it fail. And we can take you through that. And so sometimes moving through that process is just a little bit easier than kind of pure play management or business consulting, where the solutions themselves feel very unique to the client because they don't know other people who've kind of gone through this problem before.
Yeah. Yeah. And one nuance too, just to add to that is, and it kind of goes along with this whole thread of everything you're saying around listening, asking questions, making sure you don't have this hubris or this arrogance that consultants can sometimes have. But I'm also thinking that, like, a lot of times consultants need to know, or I'm sorry, not consultants, clients, the clients you're consulting to, they need to know that you are listening and understanding. And so I feel like so much of what consultants need to do, and but oftentimes overlook, is repeating back to the client what they already know. Repeating back to the client, here's my understanding of what your problem is, for example, or here's my understanding of those things that are keeping you up at night. These things that are really
Yeah.
that we're trying to address here. And the minute you do that, I mean, in my opinion, is that's almost as important as the solution you're going to come back with. Because the minute you do that, you build this connection and this trust and this understanding that the client says, hey, you understand me, you heard me, you were listening to me, you understand who we are, what's unique about us. Now I'm a little more open to your suggestions. Whereas if I skip over that, even if I do understand the client situation, but I don't prove to them that I do, then all of a sudden I don't trust that you really understood or listened to what I said or what my problems are, what's keeping me up at night. What are your thoughts on that? Is that something you've seen as well? Or
Yeah, and I think there's a trick to this too with clients, which is I was always fond of saying, all right, this is what I'm hearing. And then I repeat it back. And so there's none of us like to be wrong. I don't want to be
right,
wrong. So sometimes I'm not going to say anything because if I say it, I'm going to be wrong. But if I say, this is what I'm hearing, is this what you're telling me? Nobody's wrong, right? You
right,
kind of it becomes disarming. Um, well, yeah, that is what I'm saying. And now you can ask maybe some more pointed questions, or they're going to correct you and say, well, that's not exactly what I was saying. Okay, this is good. Then tell me again. Another one was if I was uncomfortable. Um, I always advised our people to say, keep talking, meaning tell the client to keep talking.
right.
Okay, tell me more. Tell me more. Just kind of free think for me. And again, it puts you as the consultant a little bit at ease. It gives you a chance maybe to catch up because they're either talking fast and you're not quite getting all the ideas maybe, or they've been in it for so long and you don't understand all the stuff on the periphery. Getting them to talk, sometimes they'll connect the dots for you. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah,
Yeah, especially if you're a newer consultant too. That's a great little trick. I don't want to say trick as it's not a scam. It's a trick though to take pressure off you and what you don't know. I mean, you talked about being around people that are smarter than you, and I still, even at work every day, I feel like the people that work for Third Stage are a lot smarter than I am. But there's a lot I don't know. And the longer I do consulting, ironically, the more I realize how much I don't know. I feel like I've learned a lot and I feel like I know a lot, but there's a lot. I realize every day how much I don't know.
Yeah.
And I think the more you can ask questions, the more it just deflects that pressure to have all the answers and to know everything that you feel like you should know. And it's interesting when you do ask the client things, and when you could, even if you can summarize back to a client what they just said, they give you a little 5-minute overview and you can summarize it back to them right after that. The minute you do that, it's always interesting to me how the client will say, yeah, exactly. And it's sort of like they're sold, that you haven't even prescribed anything yet. You haven't given them any sort of solution, but the fact that you just repeated back to them what they said and you clearly understand it, to me, that's half of it right there. And then the other half, of course, is, all right, what are we going to do about it? And how am I going to help you fix that problem?
Right. But I think you often have more latitude in how you're going to fix the problem than whether you're right. You can't take a million years to learn what the problem is.
Right.
I used to have a boss a long, long time ago who said there was no money in current state. There's no value in current state. Get through current state as fast as you can, because all the value is in future state. Okay,
Right.
what are you gonna do? And I like your comment about everybody being smarter than you. You know, you're surrounding yourself by with smarter people, and I think good consultants really enjoy that, because good consultants really like to learn. And one of the things that makes a great consultant is how fast they can learn, how fast they can assimilate new ideas and data and be able to both evolve their position and maybe change it or explore things that weren't first thought of. So you've come up with an idea of what the solution is going to be, but something else comes, and being able to, I hate the word pivot, but being able to pivot and say, yeah, maybe this isn't it, or it has a little bit over here. And I always enjoyed that part too of learning, right?
Yeah.
Learning more. There's, seeking out that other person who's got either the kooky idea or who's smarter than you. The only trouble with that is sometimes it's just hard to keep up with those people.
Right.
Right? That they're coming up with this stuff and they're connecting dots faster than you can. And you just, at the end of it, you got to say, okay, explain that to me again.
Yeah.
Outside the meeting.
You're just trying to stay afloat.
That's right.
Right. And, clients too, I feel like a lot of the learning that I learn every day, and the reason I like to stay connected with our clients, even as we've grown and even as I've backed out of or moved above, some of the day-to-day delivery stuff on the consulting side, I learned so much from clients. I mean, it's so funny because they hire us because we're the ones that know what we're doing. We're the smart ones. We're the ones that have the answers and the experience that they're looking for. But I learned so much just from talking to a client, like the challenges they're going through, and, their history as an organization. Sometimes there's industries we'll deal with because we work in so many different industries. There's industries I didn't even know existed. I'm like, there's a whole industry around that. I had no idea. And or you built a $1 billion company doing this. I'm like, that's insane. I didn't know that. I didn't know that existed. And tell me more. And so you end up learning so much about just the world in general by being a consultant, which I think is probably the most rewarding part.
Yeah. Well, thinking of that too, I've had clients say, well, why should I hire you? Why should we hire you? And consultants have the luxury of focus, right? You guys here in this company are doing 6, 8 jobs. You're doing everything, right? I can come in and solve this one problem for you because I can focus on it.
Right. Yeah. While you run your business the way you've been running it for however long, and I can focus on this problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also that, you're not tethered by the politics and the internal stuff that, clients have to deal with every day by being part of their organization.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here's an interesting question from Amy on LinkedIn. This is an interesting thought. I cannot answer this question, Rob, just to be clear, just because I'm a career consultant. You might be able to answer it better than me, but I've worked with a few consultants at McKinsey and EY that transitioned to consulting with around 20 years of experience working in industry. What are your thoughts on mid-career transitions into the field? So in other words, people that aren't career consultants, they didn't start off like you and I did early in our careers becoming consultants. They decide halfway through or however long into their career, like, hey, I want to take this knowledge and this these skills I've built and I want to become a consultant. How do you, how have you seen that work in the past in terms of mid-career transitions?
Yeah, I think it's a mixed bag, but some people are just natural consultants, right? I mean, they just walk around that way and they fit into the organization really easy. And Eric, I've seen you hire some people who, you know, didn't have a consulting background necessarily, but you saw in them the, you know, a ability. They were natural consultants. They just kind of worked and acted that way. They asked good questions. They seemed to fit in. They were pretty easygoing, right? Not
They're
very
humble.
arrogant,
Yeah.
humble, exactly. And then you have kind of the other side where people who have joined after 20 or 30 years in a different career who have an expectation that, well, I was a vice president in this organization and I'm coming into the consulting organization and I should be, you know, a big man. I should be a vice
A
president
VP.
or whatever it is. And that doesn't always work so great because you have to learn the industry of consulting. And so I think he'd wind up taking a step back. So
Yeah.
unfortunately for Amy, I'm sorry that it's, I think it's a mixed bag. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I would say if you're hiring in the consultancy, one of these 20 or 30-year career people from the outside, just interview the hell out of them. Figure it. You'll know. You'll know whether it's going to be a fit or not.
Yeah. Yeah. Based on the questions they're asking and how they interact in that emotional intelligence, that EQ, I think that's the most important skill. You need someone that has a minimum level of knowledge, that's important, but that the EQ, I think, is regardless of whether you're mid-career or starting out, as a junior consultant, I think that emotional intelligence is way more important than the tangible hard skills you have.
Yeah.
Because like you said, you can teach the other stuff, but you can't teach how to be humble. If someone's an arrogant a-hole, you can't teach them not to be an arrogant a-hole anymore. You need, you can't teach someone to be humble if they're not. Um, but yeah,
It's a yeah. That's a big hill to climb.
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we've been sort of, we've talked about it in passing. We've been sort of dancing around this really important thread around culture. So I want to spend a few minutes diving into culture here. But in your opinion, what kind of company culture, in the companies you've built and worked with and advised, you advise consulting firms now, including Third Stage, you advise us on how to help us scale and grow our company. But what kind of company culture do you see as being the most conducive to creating great consultants and great consultant output?
All right. So I kind of knew this question was coming at a point. And as a backdrop, as a preface to the answer of this, we get to maybe the definition of normal. And I believe that the way you fit into an organization, best consulting or not, is we find an organization who shares our dysfunction. And what I mean by that is there is no normal. There's weird stuff on both sides, right? We know
Right.
that. We can recognize that. But take the other whatever, 85% of people, the rest of us, we all have some dysfunction. And if we can find an organization whose dysfunction matches our dysfunction, we think we're normal. We walk in, we're like, this place is great. I get them. They're all like me. And
Right.
and it works, right? Um, and so you think about that. There are some organizations that tend to go to market. They tend to be more arrogant, or they tend to be more introverted, or they tend to be more like golden retrievers, right? And if you're one of those, a golden retriever or arrogant or what, you find that organization, you're gonna fit in. And you can't really say that being one of those cultures is going to be successful or not successful because they all exist out there, right? And chances are they're looking for clients whose dysfunction also matches the culture of the consulting uh, organization. So I think when you're looking, it's probably talking to a lot of people to see how they act. I have a kid who just graduated from college, and he was going through the interview process. And I had to remind him that you're interviewing them for these jobs as much as they're interviewing you. And as
Right.
young people, we tend to go in and we just want them to love us. And if they love us, it's going to be great. Yeah, we all want to be loved, but at the same time, it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to see if they're going to fit with you. Are you going to feel comfortable there, or have you kind of been pretending who you are? And then when you join the organization, I mean, it's hard to pretend for a long time. You kind of have to be yourself. Eric, I don't even know if I've answered your question. I got so lost in my
No.
preamble here. Um, so
No.
let's kind of attack that one again.
Right, right. No, that it's great. I mean, you're hitting on something that's real important, which is back to the there's two things: the emotional intelligence piece of it, but also the understanding. Is this the right place for me as a consultant? By asking questions, like for example, one question I love to ask, and I actually really like it when people ask me when I'm interviewing people is, but when I was interviewing, I used to love to ask, what does the ideal consultant look like? I mean, what types of consultants fit in the best to this organization? And then I'll ask which ones don't. What are the types of consultants or the types of people that you've hired that don't work out here? Or what type of personality or skill set is not going to fit here? And really just understanding, like, does that sound right to me? And then it also demonstrates, it also helps because, again, back to the emotional intelligence thing and asking questions and understanding. By doing that, you're seeking to understand, which is going to build a deeper connection with that consulting firm. But I guess, coming back to this is all I think the problem here is culture is such a massive Pandora's box of stuff that we could spend 2 hours just talking about a consulting culture, which unfortunately we don't have time for. But the question is more around like the company culture, and what type of culture do you think, or is there a type of culture that consulting firms should have, or traits they should have that's gonna create great consultants and a great consulting output?
Yeah. Um, I think one that allows for mistakes.
Hmm.
I think one that pushes younger people to achieve more. I like the idea of having an organization um, allow a younger consultant to kind of be on the trapeze, so to speak, but operate as a net below them, right? We're going to let you fly, but if you fall, we're going to be there to catch you. You're
Right.
not going to tank the organization. Um, we don't want you to make the same mistake again and again. So, there's learning that needs to be involved. But I think that and the ability to be entrepreneurial within the organization. Eric, if you think about this, North Highland did a great job um, with all of us, and it was the leadership at the time. North Highland has gone out and produced so many entrepreneurs. People left that organization. It's like, you did, I did, and
Hmm.
I can count a whole bunch of other people who wound up going on their own. And why is that? Is it the way they hired? Maybe, but I also think um, it was the way they cultivated the people there by allowing us to make these mistakes, by allowing us to do business development on our own and kind of learning how to do that and advising us. Um, those were probably the two biggest things. And again, I loved that organization. I thought it was a great and it probably still is. It was a great organization that allowed me to really flourish. Um, and other people, I think, would turn around and say, well, Accenture is a great organization. I never worked at Accenture. I couldn't tell you from the inside what the culture is like. Um, was that a little bit closer to the
Yeah.
spirit of your question?
Yeah, it is, and I think culture is something that, is important for you to look at, whether you're interviewing with a consulting firm to potentially go work for the consulting firm, but also if you're hiring a consulting firm, you want to understand and be sure you understand the culture, not just their qualifications and the past client experience and all that stuff. The hard stuff, you also want to look at the soft stuff, which is can I work for this
Yeah.
organization or can I work with this organization if I'm hiring them? And I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, I think
Um,
it's back to your question of what makes a good consultant, right? Asking that in the interview process or what makes one successful, and it's the hard skills and the soft skills. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. What about the are there any different skills that people need to have nowadays in consulting than maybe was important 10, 20 years ago? How in other words, how has the requirements of being a good consultant changed, if at all, here in recent years for people that are starting out in consulting?
Um, well, I think one of the big changes that's occurred in consulting in the industry itself is it's become very broad. Everybody's a consultant
Mhm.
now. And certainly when I started, I don't know, 30 years ago, maybe more, um, there were kind of technology consultants and there were management consultants, and right in management you had operations, you had human capital, you had strategy, you had right there. But now you might have people developing code overseas for $40 an hour that are consultants. They fit
Right.
into that box. Um, so I would say first we have to kind of narrow the field a little bit. And when I think of consultants, I think of the traditional right view of management consultants, kind of where I started of right operational strategy, human capital, that kind of stuff, and technology, of course. And then there are even divisions within technology that breaks down further into degrees of specialization. Um, I think, though, that the way it has changed is there is greater need for specialization. So,
Mhm.
more focused on your area of expertise, your field of expertise, um, where I think being a generalist years ago really carried the day. I think it still does. I think it's still a great skill to have, but being able to be a generalist and a specialist at the same time um, is great. And then, of course, trying to keep up with, the newer technologies. Um, is also terrific. Um, when I remember when I was a younger consultant, you know, there was a lot of COBOL out there,
Mhm.
and people were looking for consultants. They were starting to pay more and more for COBOL programmers because they just couldn't find them anywhere, and nobody wanted to do it. Um, And so I think that there are still plenty of kind of legacy technologies or legacy techniques that people need to know because you can make a living there. Um, the only trouble is if you stay there too long, you fall behind the curve, and it's a lot harder to catch up. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
So how do this might be a tough question, but I'll ask it anyway. But how do you balance that need for specialization, especially now with technology changing and evolving so quickly? There's just no way for you to know everything about every technology and every business solution that's out there. So, especially earlier in your career, you have to sort of focus and pick an area you're going to hone in on. But at the same time, to be a really good consultant, to be a great consultant, I would argue you have to understand how the big picture works and how what you're doing over here on the technology side affects the people and the process side and the strategy side and vice versa. So how do you navigate that? And I struggle with this myself, to be honest. I mean, even now, 25 years into my career, I still struggle with like how much do I want to specialize versus how much do I want to have a big picture, broad understanding of how business and technology and strategy all fits together.
I think part of that is it might just be personal. Is I realized early on that I was in a career that was very focused. Right, we would pick an idea and we would drill just a mile deep, and it it didn't give me the same buzz. It didn't excite me the way the big picture does.
Mm,
Um, I'm almost just the way I walk around the world. I'm a strategy guy. I'm a big picture guy. That's just it. My wife tells me all the time. She's like, "Come on, focus, focus," because I'm somewhere else. My head is somewhere
yeah.
else. I'm putting bigger pieces together, um, and so I admire those people who can focus that way and drill down. But maybe to answer your question specifically, um, companies also don't move as fast as the technology does, right? They have something embedded in their organization. They're not going to change it every 6 months because things are changing. They're like, I got to run a business. My business is not the technology. The technology supports my business. And so, you know, knowing some of this legacy stuff isn't such a bad idea because you can actually help your client with the problems that they actually have.
Right.
Um, I think we just have to force ourselves to try to learn new stuff, read articles, be involved in projects that have something new that I haven't been exposed to before. And over time, I think you just get better at putting these pieces together, um, and constantly building that big picture. I think, right, seeing enough of it is, it's almost automatic. It forces you to see the big picture, in a way, whether you want to or not, unless you just stay in this very specific place your whole career.
Yeah.
So how's
Yeah.
that for kind of a non-answer? That was a
No, it's a great one, and it's I think what you're saying is there's no right or wrong answer. I mean, I think it's a matter of kind of fitting to your personality, and um, I would say that if you do specialize, I think it's important to at least secondarily understand the big picture outside of your specialization, because you have to understand what the impacts are of what you're doing here over in this little thread that you're honed in on or focused on. There are impacts to other parts of things that maybe you're not an expert in, but it's helpful to understand that, for example, if I, deploy a, off the shelf cloud solution that's relatively rigid or inflexible or whatever you want to call it, that's my specialization. That's okay. Keep doing that. But you need to understand, well, there's a people impact to that too now. Like, people are not going to adapt to that change as easily as if you had a highly customized solution that you're deploying. And so, not to say, well, then you should change your specialization because there's a negative impact potentially. It's just, no, to just understand what that is and understand that the work you're doing has an impact over here. And you have to just be able to, at the very least, empathize with how that affects other parts of what you do.
Yeah, I
Um,
think that's well said, Eric.
Here's some. I'm just going to pull out some interesting, just random comments here before I get to a couple other questions I have for you, Rob. But here's a comment from a few minutes ago from Sabir on YouTube. It says 1980 machine learning. Some discussion on the Simulmatics company would be very relevant. I don't know what that is, but I don't know if you've heard that term, Simulmatics.
I haven't.
All right. Well, that's all right. It's a little out of scope for. We're not going to get into 80s machine learning in this conversation, but interesting comment there. Here's another comment, just sort of agreeing with something you said earlier, Rob from LinkedIn. 100% agree. Ask questions before you diagnose and prescribe a solution. So, thank you for that comment there. And then here's a question or a comment from William on YouTube. William says, yes, getting real buy-in requires artful communication with key situational influencers. Newbies get a hint of yes and barrel through the process, then inevitably run into implementation problems. So I think that's well said. If you don't take that time to understand the influencers and the politics, that's another thing. You have
Yeah.
to understand the politics of the organizations you're consulting to, and not, for better or for worse. There's probably some weird, unhealthy or ineffective politics and things that happen internally, organizationally. You have to understand that lay of the land, that understanding. And back to your point, Rob, the value being in the future state, not the current state. My response to that would be, well, you can't be effective in the future state unless you understand the current state, because you've got to be able to navigate those pitfalls and those
Mhm.
landmines along the way.
Yep.
And then here's another, let's see, a couple other comments here. Here's just a fun one. William, who I know watches a lot of our stuff and knows that I like rock and roll. Maybe he even sees the Def Leppard album right behind my head here. He says, FYI, Def Leppard is on tour this summer. Big show. So totally out of scope, but thank you. I appreciate the comment there. So just some fun comments and thoughts from the audience there. So just I want to ask you two closing questions here, Rob. One is for people that are starting off in consulting, and the other one is going to be for people that are maybe further along in their careers and they're trying to either transition to consulting or take their consulting to the next level. Let's start with people starting off in consulting, people that are just starting off. What closing advice would you have? Like if you're going to leave people with one or two things as they think about how they enter the world of consulting, what would that be?
I think it's kind of a multifaceted answer of um, what in this is going to make you happy. There's a financial component to it. Some people are comfortable with travel. Some people are not. I think you got to look at the organization. Are you going to be traveling? Are you going to be local? Are you going to be remote? What does that look like? Is there an opportunity, let's say, to work overseas? Maybe something that you want, as well as, think about, I used the word earlier, dysfunction, somewhat tongue in cheek, but I think you get my meaning, which is um, find the organization where you fit, where you can thrive. And I get it. Sometimes we don't have a lot of options, right? I have one offer, great. I'm going to take the offer. I'm going to learn there, and then over time, I'm going to move. But maybe it's for every career. Somebody who's young, be patient with yourself. It's okay to be impatient, but be patient with yourself. You need to evolve as well. There are things you need to learn, and you're going to make some of these mistakes. And I always thought it was baloney that you're going to make a mistake and you're going to learn from that mistake. I can tell you that there are certain mistakes I have made my whole life. Hopefully, the time between making that mistake has grown and the amplitude of that mistake has been somewhat lowered. But, you know, you got to forgive yourself a little bit. You make the mistake and you keep moving on.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially like you said at the very beginning of this conversation, you're going to be surrounded by people that are smarter than you and have much more experience than you. And it can be a bit intimidating, and it can make, at least when I started off, I felt like I had to be at that level. I had to quickly be at that same level of knowledge and understanding. And the reality is I wasn't. So, I was trying to pretend to be something I wasn't. And that's something I would not recommend doing, because I think it can create some blind spots, and it just puts too much pressure on yourself that you don't need and no one expects you to accomplish.
Yeah,
Um,
good advice.
what about established consultants, people that are, maybe mid-career, maybe they've been a consultant for a while, maybe they're stuck, maybe they're not sure how to really take it to that next level. What sort of, is there anything you would add to that list for people that are already in the world of
Yeah,
consulting?
absolutely. All right. This group is a little bit different. You need to learn how to sell. You got to get over it. Some people say sales is a dirty word. I don't sell. I had a friend who used to say, I don't sell. I help my friends with their business problems. I just happen to be very good at making friends. It's great advice.
You're still selling.
You have to. That's how the organization that you work in survives. Um, and it's rare for an organization to get lots of calls coming in that say, I need you. I heard about you. I need you. And Eric, I admire you and Third Stage, because you are one of the only organizations I've ever run into that can actually do that. I think third stage is a very special place, not just for that reason, but for other reasons. Um, and so you have to find your voice, though. You have to figure out your style of how do you work with clients to develop new business.
Right. That's great advice. Um, yeah, and I agree. And it's funny you say that because I am one of those people that say I don't sell. But deep down I know I am selling. I'm just not. I think there's a difference though between selling effectively and trying too hard to sell to where it's ineffective. And I think as consultants, you have to be a trusted advisor. People need to know that you're not only acting in your own self-interest of getting follow-on work or getting additional consulting work. They have to know that you're acting in their best interest, the client's best interest, and helping them. And so I always tell our consultants, if you feel like you're selling, then you're not selling well. And that's one of my favorite lines to use with our senior people. Is it's more of a consultative. I'm talking to you, Rob. I'm understanding your problems. And by the way, here's some ideas I have on how you might fix that problem. And oh yes, by the way, our firm, Third Stage Consulting, can help you do that. And so to me, it's like maybe it's not that I'm not selling. It's just more of a low pressure consultative sort of style of selling that for us, at least it works. I'm not saying that's right for
Well,
everyone, but for us, it seems to work.
when you use the word sales and people think of used car salesman,
Yeah.
it's not. It, call it whatever you want, but money has to flow into the business, and somebody has to be able to get it. And if you're sincere as you're talking with the client about their problem and you believe that you have this solution, well, they're going to solve the problem. I would rather that they solved it with me and not with that guy
Right.
over there.
Right.
But there seems to be this hurdle, and frankly, it is people. I think maybe they feel dirty if
Right.
they do it because, well, they don't really know the technique of what you're talking about, of how to be consultative, how to work with somebody to craft a solution, and knowing the nuance of timing to say, okay, well, now we're on the clock.
Yeah.
So I've got to put a letter together in order to actually, for us to pursue this together.
Yeah.
But, you know, you may be a hunter or a farmer. The farming rate within existing accounts, are you walking the halls when at, at the end of the day to see who's still working and who might need help? Or are you the person who's really good at church or at your, book club or whatever to be able to chat to people a little bit about what they do and
Right.
what you do. And the final thing maybe is that the number of times I've heard consulting organizations or professional services organizations somehow finally tell the client, oh, this is what we do that. And the client says, really? And you think, man, you should have been saying that 6 months ago. They don't even know
Right.
what you do. The client doesn't know what you do. You're so afraid to
Sell.
develop the business that you're not even talking about what you're great as an organization at, and something I think to be proud of. If you're doing great work, it's you should be proud of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. And I couldn't agree more. It's almost like, you have to have that mindset of you want to be a trusted advisor. You want to help a client. Then part of helping that client is showing them what you know, showing them what you can do, showing them how you can help. And you don't have to call it, you don't call it sales, call it something else, business development, whatever you want to
Business
call it,
development.
consulting,
Yeah.
whatever you, but the point is you need to be able to be effective in that selling. So I lied. I said that was my last question, but I have to ask this question because it's come up twice just here in the last couple of minutes. And given your background in AI, I have to ask this question. So I'm going to ask you it's two questions. I'm going to read them both and I'll kind of hone in on the second one because I think it sort of summarizes it. So this will be our last bonus question here for today. First, part A is from Subir. Subir says, consulting is tied to knowledge monetization of culture, business practices, and tangible skills, including technology. How do we see AI's impact to singularly replace that knowledge differential? And then let me read part B, which I think is maybe this might be a little bit easier to get your head around, Rob, and answer it in this way. And this is from LinkedIn, through Murugan. I'm 90% sure I butchered your name. I'm so sorry, but this is from LinkedIn. And the person says, we all know AI plays a major role in most industries. How will it impact consulting? So let's just maybe simplify it and say, how do you think AI is affecting or will affect the world of consulting now and in years to come?
Mm, yeah. You have to kind of split it in two camps, that there are people who really dig AI. I think it's going to be the coolest thing. I think it's going to be great. Yeah, everything comes with problems. Every relationship comes with problems. Okay, put all that stuff aside for a minute. I think it's really cool. I think it's going to be very helpful. And then there are people who are just terrified of it because they feel like they're just going to be displaced. Um, I think what you're going to see with AI in consulting is going to be around the periphery at first. Meaning, I sit on the board of actually an AI company that has a platform that responds to RFPs. You put an RFP into this technology, and in about 20 minutes, it has written the entire answer response without your calls and resumes. And that process used to take days, if not weeks, to do. You still have to edit it and look at it, but it's been trained to go out like ChatGPT and look at the world of RFPs and the responses, and it writes it. And it's, to me,
Brilliant.
it's cool. And so later on, there are going to be two groups, right? There's going to be one group that's using some RFP response technology, and those who are still doing it the old fashioned way. And it's just going to get them, it's just going to be faster. I'm going to be able to respond to that many more RFPs. I think you're going to start to see stuff similar to that with requirements. So I'm going to ask a whole bunch of questions. I'm going to figure out what the key requirements are. And then there's going to be, like everything, right? There's all these other requirements that we know need to go into the document. But the strategic requirements are the ones that the consultant, I think, is really going to figure out. And the rest of them can be done by AI. It's just going to be, right? It's out there. All these responses are out there. I see that. I see AI being able to help me structure my thoughts if I'm going to do a client interview and what questions I should be asking, as opposed to going back and looking at, old questionnaires. I could even today, I could probably go out to ChatGPT and put that in. I'm going to do an interview on this topic. What are some great questions to ask?
Right.
I do not think, though, that AI is going to replace the consultant for a couple of reasons. One, that human interaction is necessary. It just is. People will believe me more than they will believe some document. They I should have the same knowledge, but there's that personal connection, I think works. And then I also think that there's nuance, that, right, there's tone of voice, that there's body language. There are things like that only occur in kind of intimate situations where you're with clients and you're responding to what they're saying and they're responding to what you're saying. So I think we are a necessary vehicle in actually solving the problem.
Yeah. Really well said. I never thought of this until you just said that, but I think what you're saying is true. I fully believe what you just said. And B, I think if anything, maybe it just changes the mix of hard versus soft skills that consultants are going to need to have, because now, the hard skills, the technical knowledge can be somewhat augmented or replaced by AI. But to your point, the human interaction, the listening, the understanding, the body language, the empathy, the human stuff, that might become the product. That might become the consulting product now, that's now augmented by knowledge of AI. Not that you can get away with not knowing anything, because obviously you have to know how to teach AI, how to use AI, how to apply it, all that stuff. But but you can maybe have less technical depth now and augment it with AI. But the emotional intelligence, the EQ, the soft skills, all the other stuff we talked about with consulting, AI is not going to fix that or automate that for us anytime soon.
Agreed.
So, well, cool. Well, very good, Rob. Well, thanks for taking a few extra minutes to answer that bonus question, and more importantly, thank you for taking the time to be here today. I know you work with a lot of different companies, and you're a busy guy. I appreciate learning from you as always. I've learned from you for 20 years now. I learned from you again here today. Every time I talk to you, I learn something new. So I appreciate you being here today and sharing your knowledge with the audience here today. How can people best learn about you, connect with you, and Blue Pasture Advisors as well?
Yeah. So you can go out to our website. It's thin because we're particular about who we work with, but it's called bluepastureadvisors.com, or you can email me at rob@bluepastureadvisors.com. We have some articles that are out there on how to transact, but Eric, I love doing this, and love to have a dialogue with people about what they're working on, and hearing what's going on in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've tagged you on LinkedIn too. So if you're watching this on LinkedIn, just go to the show notes below, the description below. You'll see Rob tagged there, as well as his company, Blue Pasture Advisors. So you can also go there too if you want to connect with Rob on LinkedIn. So, well, thanks again for being here today. Really appreciate it, Rob, and thank you to the audience for being here and all the great questions. Hopefully, you've learned as much as I have here today. And again, this live interview format, we do it every Tuesday, same time, same place. Keep an eye out. I think 3 to 4 weeks from now is the official episode that will feature this interview once we edit it and add some additional content to it, add the music and the cool title transitions, all that cool stuff that go with podcasts. We'll do all that. You'll see it released in a few weeks here, and you can watch that weekly podcast by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. And Transformation Ground Control is the name of that podcast. So thanks for being part of that live production here today. Hope you all have a great day, and we will see you next time. Take care.